Imagine winning a brand new car on a game show. Like the confetti falls, the crowd goes totally wild, and you're holding the keys to this beautiful new vehicle.
Oh, that sounds like the dream, right?
Right. But then, as you're walking off the stage, the producers pull you aside and explain that, well, you owe the IRS a massive tax bill on the value of that prize.
Ah, yeah, the fine print.
Exactly. And if you don't have, I don't know, $10,000 or $15,000 in cash just sitting in your bank account, that prize actually bankrupts you.
Which is terrifying. It transforms what looks like, financial relief on paper into a totally engineered financial emergency in reality.
Right. And now imagine that exact scenario happening to 643,000 Americans at the exact same time.
Wow. Yeah, that's just a massive scale.
It is. And that engineered emergency is just one piece of a much larger puzzle that we are examining today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we are looking at a pair of highly detailed reports published on May 1st, 2026. These are from an independent Substack publication called Impeach 47.
Right, and we should probably put a big asterisk on that right away.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Impeach 47 makes no secret of their intense anti-administration bias. I mean, it's literally right there in the name.
Yeah, you can't really miss it.
Right. So here is our crucial disclaimer for you listening at home. We always prefer multiple perspectives and objective analysis. So we are not taking sides here, and we're definitely not endorsing these viewpoints.
Exactly. We're just impartially reporting on the data and the arguments that these authors compiled. Because, honestly, setting the politics aside for a second, the underlying math they present is fascinating.
It really is. We want you to fully understand the contours of this current political debate. So our mission today is to unpack the specific economic models these articles use to claim that recent federal policy shifts are, well, structurally dismantling the American middle class.
Yeah, and their thesis is that these aren't just standard legislative rollbacks.
Oh.
They argue that these shifts intentionally move economic power away from everyday workers and directly onto the balance sheets of political donors.
Which brings us to the hook of their whole argument. I mean, what do 900,000 lost clean energy jobs and an unexpected $10,850 tax bill for a student borrower have in common?
Well, according to the source, they are symptoms of the exact same mechanism, the government just abruptly withdrawing its support for the middle class.
Throwing citizens into hostile private markets, basically. So let's start with their first report, which looks at the manufacturing landscape right before the rollback of the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA.
Right. So looking at the numbers from 2024, it tells the story of an unprecedented industrial boom. I mean, we are looking at over 400,000 new clean energy jobs created in a really short window.
Which is huge.
It is. The authors cite $422 billion in private investment announced across 48 different states. Plus, automakers and suppliers committed to 132 new or expanded EV and battery plants across 23 states.
And the growth rate they highlight is what really stands out to me. Clean energy jobs were growing 3 times faster than the rest of the U.S. workforce in 2024.
Yeah, 3 times faster. That's not just a trend, that's an explosion.
Exactly. But what the authors really emphasize is the geography of this money. This was not, venture capital just flowing into Silicon Valley software startups.
Right.
These were tangible, blue-collar manufacturing projects landing in communities that had essentially spent 30 years watching their factories get boarded up.
Yeah, and the text notes that 90% of all new IRA-driven projects landed in the manufacturing sector.
So to understand how those numbers got so big so fast, you really have to look at the mechanism of the IRA itself. It's like a massive economic flywheel. It took immense effort to get it spinning, but once it did, it generated real momentum.
That's a great way to put it. The legislation essentially acted as a massive, federally backed co-signer for corporate America.
Right. Like, if a company wants to build a $2 billion battery facility, they need absolute certainty that the market will support that investment over the next decade.
Exactly. And the IRA provided that certainty through long-term tax incentives. It underwrote the risk.
So if you're an executive board, you look at those federal incentives and suddenly the math makes perfect sense. You greenlight the factory. But then on July 4, 2025, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is signed into law.
Yeah. The catalyst for the reversal.
Right. And returning to the analogy, it's like someone throwing a heavy steel wrench into the gears right as that economic flywheel reached top speed. It causes this violent, immediate halt.
And that collapse is exactly what the data shows in the text. The new bill gutted the core tax incentives for wind, solar, EVs, and domestic manufacturing.
And it was fast, too.
Oh, incredibly fast. The authors make a crucial point here. The fallout did not wait for the bill to take full effect. Just the policy uncertainty leading up to the signing prompted companies to cancel or downsize $14 billion in investments.
Just from the rumor of it.
Yes. 10,000 jobs vanished almost overnight just from the uncertainty. And a staggering $500 billion in announced but unspent manufacturing investment was simply frozen.
$500 billion frozen.
Yeah. And the source's core thesis is that these weren't abstract projections on a spreadsheet. These were tangible manufacturing jobs pulled from communities that had just started seeing revival.
But shutting down factories is really only half the equation in their argument. The other half is what happens to the consumer when the energy market is abruptly rewired. We move from, like, macroscopic infrastructure directly to your household bills.
Right, which brings us to the evergreen action analysis that the text cites. They outline the downstream consequences of this new legislation.
And the numbers are grim.
Very. The new bill is projected to cost roughly 900,000 jobs. But beyond that, it's projected to raise the average American household's electricity bill by $110 to $400 per year.
Wow.
All while reducing new grid capacity by 50% over the next decade.
Okay, let me jump in here and play devil's advocate for a second, because I want to push back on their framing.
Sure, go for it.
The authors claim that clean energy was cheaper and the, quote, market was working under the IRA. But, I mean, if a sector requires $422 billion in government-sparked investment just to survive, is it really a free market? Or is the government just picking a new winner?
It's a fair question, and the report actually anticipates that exact critique.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the authors argue that the fossil fuel industry only dominates because of literally decades of favorable regulations and subsidies.
Okay, so the playing field was already tilted.
Exactly. The IRA was just meant to establish a level playing field by offering stable, long-term incentives to give private capital certainty.
So they're arguing that by pulling the rug out, it's not a return to a free market at all.
Right. They argue it's a deliberate tilt back toward the balance sheets of oil and gas owners.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, there's a huge global context here.
The China data, right?
Yes. The text points out that China is investing over $600 billion annually in clean energy. So the source frames this U.S. policy shift as basically unilateral disarmament in a global economic race.
Unilateral disarmament, that's a strong phrase. But it perfectly connects to the second source document. Because if the energy bill raises household costs and shifts the burden from corporations to families, the new student loan policies are mathematically designed to drastically limit household wealth.
Yeah, let's pivot to that second report on federal student loans in the spring of 2026. Because the sheer scale of the crisis they lay out is, well, it's terrifying.
It really is.
We're looking at 9.2 million borrowers currently in default. That means no payment in over 270 days.
And the velocity of that number, one borrower is defaulting on a federal loan every 9 seconds?
Yeah, one every 9 seconds. Projections suggest 13 million could be in default by year end, out of a $1.69 trillion portfolio.
Trillion, with a T.
Exactly. And collections, wage garnishments, and Social Security offsets have all resumed.
So to understand how we got here, we have to unpack the Trump administration's April 30, 2026 graduate loan cap rule.
Right, this is where the policy shift really bites. The new rule eliminates the graduate PLUS loan entirely. It caps most grad programs at $20,500 a year and med and law schools at $50,000 a year.
Which pushes students straight into variable rate private loans if their tuition is higher than that cap, which it usually is.
Absolutely. And then there's the new repayment assistance plan, which replaces the much more forgiving SAVE plan.
Right.
The new plan mandates payments up to 10% of gross income for up to 30 years.
Gross income, not discretionary. That is a massive difference.
It's huge.
But I want to go back to that game show analogy from the start of the deep dive because we have to talk about the 643,000 borrowers who are waiting for forgiveness and this new forgiveness tax bomb.
Oh, this is the part that really traps people.
Exactly. Say you have $50,000 forgiven and your income is $65,000. Under this new policy, that forgiven debt is treated as taxable income.
Right.
So you suddenly face a $10,850 tax bill. It's supposed to be a relief, but it's engineered to trigger an immediate financial emergency. You literally can't afford to be forgiven.
Which brings us to the author's underlying synthesis. They argue this crisis isn't an accident.
Not a glitch.
Exactly. The system is functioning exactly as designed. It's built entirely around the financial interests of lenders and servicers. The source argues it treats a required post-secondary credential, which you basically need for any living wage job, as a consumer product sold on compounding credit.
And the macroeconomic impact of this debt burden is where we move beyond just the individual struggle. It hits the national economy.
It acts as a massive anchor. The text cites data showing that every 1 percentage point increase in a borrower's debt-to-income ratio reduces their consumption by 3.7 percentage points.
That is huge. That's money not going to local restaurants, not buying groceries, not flowing into the economy.
Yep. And look at housing. The authors cite a 2026 Fidelity report noting that 32% of all borrowers have delayed buying a home due to debt.
And for millennials and Gen Z, it's even worse, like 36 or 37%.
Yeah, correctly.
Okay, so let me ask a pointed question based on their data. Because the source claims that canceling $10,000 per borrower generates a 145 to 208% return on investment over 10 years.
Right, through increased spending and tax revenue.
So if the math is that overwhelmingly positive for the whole economy, why is debt cancellation constantly framed by politicians as fiscally irresponsible?
Well, the authors offer a pretty brutal conclusion to that. They argue the fiscally irresponsible argument is purely a smokescreen.
A smokescreen for who?
For those who don't need relief themselves and whose financial interests are served by the debt remaining exactly where it is.
The servicers and the private lenders?
Exactly.
So does the source offer any hope or alternative models to prove we don't have to live like this?
They do, actually. They highlight peer nations like Germany, France, Norway, and Sweden, which have zero or nominal tuition.
So it is possible.
Totally. And domestically, they point to the Maine model. Maine allowed 23,000 high school graduates to enroll tuition-free in community colleges.
Wow.
Yeah. The source argues that higher education should just be treated as model infrastructure. Just like it was when we were building the post-WWII middle class.
Education as infrastructure. I like that framing. So bringing this whole deep dive together, let's summarize the core thematic link between these two impeached 47 articles.
Yeah. What's the big takeaway?
Well, according to the authors, whether you are looking at the 900,000 clean energy jobs at risk or the 9.2 million students in default, current federal policies are systematically prioritizing donor, lender, and corporate interests over middle-class wealth building.
And just as a quick reminder to everyone listening, these are the fervent arguments and data points compiled by a distinctly anti-administration publication.
Right. We unpacked this here today to help you grasp the specific mechanics of their critiques without us taking a side.
Exactly. It's about understanding the data driving the conversation.
Which leaves you with one final provocative question to mull over on your own. If the United States structurally treats both the energy transition and higher education as individual financial burdens to be exploited rather than vital national infrastructure to be subsidized, what happens to the country's global competitiveness in 20 years when we are forced to compete against nations that invest heavily in both?
It's a pretty sobering thought.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.